Hey everybody, and welcome to Epic Everyday, our weekday podcast for busy, stressed out Christians who want to do more than just survive, who really want to thrive.
Yeah.
I'm Liz Ferrix, and this is my husband Evan.
Good morning.
And we're so glad you guys are here with us on this wonderful Thursday.
Yeah.
Since it's Thursday, we thought we'd talk about being connected, which is, connecting to God and connecting to the people around you. And this week we've been talking about forgiveness, so we thought we'd talk about reconciliation.
Yeah, this is the part of forgiveness that I think this is the thing we want, right? We want to fix the relationship when it's broken. We want things, I think unfortunately, we often want things to just go back to the way they were.
Right.
And that's never going to happen. But taking the right steps can make things better, which is a good thing.
Yeah, it's the difference. Forgiveness is when you let an offense go, you trust God to take care of it. Like we talked about on Monday, you're moving past it instead of hanging on to it in your baggage. But reconciliation is the process where you actually repair the relationship. Mm-hmm. Forgiveness has nothing to do with the other person.
Right.
And it's unconditional because it's what we need to do for our own souls and for our own health. Yeah. Whereas reconciliation is actually conditional.
Yeah, this takes two people. And I think for me, this is a tricky one because, we do forgiveness because it's a command and, we try our best and through prayer and asking for help, we get through that. But when reconciliation doesn't happen, that's when it's easy for bitterness to creep into for me, because it's like, okay, I think I tried to do the right thing here, but why is this relationship still broken? What's going on?
Right.
It's hard to deal with that, but trying to have the right amount of involvement, right? Like just doing what I'm supposed to be doing in the relationship. I can't manage the other side.
Right.
And trying to let that go is really difficult.
Yeah. Reconciliation is where we reach out to the other person and they can decide whether to reach back or not. We can't reach far enough to cover the distance between both of us, Mm-hmm. We can only reach halfway.
Yeah. And I think another pitfall is it's easy for unresolved, it still feels like unresolved conflict, because I guess it kind of is, even if you've forgiven them.
Right.
But it's too easy for that to become a spiritual block or a block to our spiritual growth. And so we need to maintain as best we can our spiritual development, and the practice of forgiveness is a great way to do that. But if we can't have reconciliation, we can't let that block us from continuing to grow.
Yeah, we just have to keep forgiving, because there's almost like a second offense, because if there's an offense, whether, whatever your part is, whatever the other person's part is, because there's always, both people.
Yeah.
It takes two cooks in this case to, cook up a conflict.
That's pretty good.
So, there's your part and the other person's part. And even if you apologize for your part and they don't respond, there's not just the original sin. There's like the second thing where they're ignoring you or they're rejecting you, and I think that's one of the reasons people get so stressed out about reconciliation, because they think that forgiveness and reconciliation are the same thing, and that true forgiveness means putting yourself in a position to be re-injured, to trust someone who's not trustworthy, or, if you're in an abusive situation, to let them keep abusing you, which is just not true.
Yeah. And even if the relationship is broken now, it sometimes feels like getting hurt again. You're going to think about this person, or maybe you do have an interaction with them, and it feels like another injury. And these are times where we just got to keep coming back to God and being like, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know why we can't fix this relationship. Please,
Well, it is another injury, because it is, like I said, it's them rejecting you or ignoring you. It's still hurtful.
Yeah.
So you still have to go through the process of being like, all right, Lord, help me to forgive this new thing,
Yeah. Reconciliation works. So that's kind of from the angle of the person who was sinned against, right? Like they're wanting to, it could be either way, but reconciliation really works best when you're the one who's done the injuring, and you go and start making amends and apologize and start acting differently and treating the person
Right.
with respect. Whatever it is that you weren't doing before, if you start to do that, that's when reconciliation really works, because that's a really powerful thing. The humility that comes with that, and, that can really make for an extraordinary relationship on the other end, if the person's willing to forgive you.
Totally. Whenever I think about that, I think about Pamela Aden wrote a Pride and Prejudice from Darcy's perspective. And in it, one of the things that I really love is, his apologizing to Bingley, which, if you're familiar with the story, if you're not familiar with it, Darcy separates Bingley and the love of his life.
For noble reasons.
Yes, because
as far as he understands.
Because he thinks that she doesn't really love him, and her family is not that great, and he just doesn't want Bingley to be saddled with a horrible mother-in-law and, social consequences, and for someone that doesn't even love him. But one of the things that I love that Aiden does in the series, and actually, it's, totally in canon, but when Darcy apologizes to Bingley and says, "Oh, I separated you and Jane, and I shouldn't have, and I'm sorry." Mm-hmm. He doesn't give that spiel until after he's proven his remorse through his actions. Like, he's done the work of repentance. He actually brings Bingley back to the town that she lives in, and it's then that he apologizes.
Yeah, so he's doing the legwork before he uses his words.
Right, because I think sometimes, if you're the party that did the injuring, it's easy to talk about apologizing, to talk about, okay, I'm a different person, but it's difficult if you are the injured party to believe that, because talk is cheap. Mm-hmm. So having someone actually prove that along with their apology, I don't know, I think reconciliation needs both parties to understand what went wrong and what their part of the problem was, what they threw into the pot. And then to become different people, to become someone that doesn't do that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that could be one of the scary things why we hesitate to do this, but we've got to plunge forward. It's the relationship's going to be different, like I said.
Right.
The people, like you just said, are going to be different. There's a lot of unknowns, but we're going forward in this amazing unity that comes from grace and from, the forgiveness of sin and reconciliation. I mean, that's the way we enter into a relationship with God.
Right.
And it's going through pain. I mean, sin causes pain. Broken relationships are painful, but then the healing process is that much more sweet.
Right. Yeah. And it doesn't mean, the Bible commands us to do the work of reconciliation, but it doesn't command us to just willy-nilly let people into our lives. I mean, healthy boundaries means that you pick and choose, I really loved Doug Birch talked in Fairly Spiritual. That's his podcast. He had a show on reconciliation, and he talked about how, if someone, even if they don't respond well to, doing the work of reconciliation at the time, when they're ready to do the reconciliation, they'll be the kind of people that come to you and say, thank you. Thanks for not letting me continue in my sin. Thanks for not letting me, continue my poor behavior.
Yeah. Well, and there's that psalm, right, of a wise man appreciates rebuke.
Right.
And
Proverbs.
Yeah, proverb. So, yeah, that's the kind of people it's going to work with. Those are the relationships I cherish, and we want to have people like that in our life. But yeah, this is hard because it's not always a person like that. And it doesn't always work. And yet we forgive. And like we said at the beginning, sometimes that means forgiving over and over again. Every time the person comes to mind or every time there's a new interaction that's painful.
Right.
And that's an important thing to do too. That's caring for our heart, so we don't get sucked into bitterness. Exactly.
Another example of conditional reconciliation in the Bible is Joseph, which is one that I really love because that's something that I struggled with. For the longest time, I thought forgiveness and reconciliation were the same thing, and that I did have to put myself in abusive situations, that was what forgiveness meant. when you look at Joseph, his brothers are abusive. They strip him of his clothes, throw him in this well, and then...
yeah, I mean, they nearly murder him, and then they kind of have this
they
other
change their
bright
minds,
idea.
and they're like, oh, we could sell him into slavery and get money off of him rather than just killing him now.
Yeah.
And so they sell him off to Egypt, which God uses that. Joseph becomes the second in command in Egypt, and he helps provide food for Israel during the famine and provide a place for them to live. But when Joseph's brothers first come into Egypt to get food, Joseph isn't like, oh, hey, I'm Joseph, your brother that you almost killed. Want to be friends again?
Right.
Like, he doesn't do that. Instead, he's
kind of spying on him.
Right. Yeah. And he puts them in a situation where they could repeat their mistake. Mm-hmm. They could say the same thing. They could try to destroy the brother that kind of took Joseph's place as their father's favorite. And he doesn't,
Right. Yeah, it's a test to see if they've changed at all.
Right. And it's great because they go through all these hoops, and then kind of at the okay, now here's where you can ditch Benjamin. They're like, oh no, it's because of what horrible things we did to Joseph. God's punishing us for that. And, and they're like, well, we can't do the same thing to Benjamin. Like they go through that process. And so then is when Joseph says, I'm Joseph, the brother that you sold into slavery, And
they're afraid.
Right. And he forgives them.
Yeah.
He says, what you meant for evil, God designed for good. And there's this great example of how forgiveness, the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. Because he forgives them, but he doesn't just open himself back up to the same bad behavior.
Yeah. And I would imagine for those years that he was in Egypt, he spent some time in prison and all kinds of stuff. I would imagine somehow over the course of that time, God did a work in his heart where he was able to forgive his brothers before he'd even met them again.
Yeah.
And he probably thought he'd never see his family again. But he was still had to do that work of forgiveness. Otherwise, he could never have gone through that whole ordeal of seeing them again. If we haven't forgiven someone, and if we haven't, at least tried to do reconciliation, done our part, whatever we're supposed to be doing, it's like quicksand, getting sucked into that situation again, or it can be so devastating to interact with the person. But
right,
these are the spiritual ways that God can strengthen our heart and increase our resolve and our ability to have good relationships with other people and heal relationships that are broken.
Right.
This is important spiritual work.
Because it's not love. Letting people continue in bad behavior is not love. Yeah. It's actually letting them get further away from God. It's letting them get further down a path of sin. It's letting them make themselves miserable. All right, well, hopefully that gives us all some stuff to think about. And hopefully, there is a difference between reconciliation and forgiveness. And though we are called to do the work of forgiveness unconditionally, we're not called to reconcile unconditionally. We're called to, just like Jesus came to save everyone that decided they were willing to be saved, Well,
yeah, we're called to attempt and be available for reconciliation. Like, we can't deny it if it's available.
Right. Yeah. If somebody comes and they're like, I want to reconcile with you, you can't be like, no.
Right. It's optional. I'm not going to do it. Like, that's you hanging on to bitterness.
Right.
If there's an opportunity, we seize it. But we can't control the other person.
Right. We just keep our hand reached out halfway, but we don't go past that halfway point.
Yeah. And it's hard, but God gets us through it.
Yeah. We love you guys, and we're praying for you. As always, pick whether today is going to be awesome, whether you're going to strengthen those neural pathways for good things, or you're going to strengthen those neural pathways to look for bad things, because whatever you focus on is what tends to hang around in your life.
Yeah.
Come back tomorrow, and we're going to continue our discussion on forgiveness and talk about processing with other people.
Yep. We don't do it in a vacuum.
All right, you guys, have an awesome Thursday.
Yep. See you later.